So it's wonderful to be with you today, RRUUC, especially on the occasion I hear you're celebrating your 60th birthday this fall. Congratulations on that. It's been 12 years since I first stood in this pulpit as a nervous intern here under the guidance of Reverend Scott Alexander and Russ Savage. I don't know if anybody remembers that. That 1 year, right? Seems like both a long time ago and the blink of an eye to me. You've been served by so many excellent clergy and religious professionals, and I'm always delighted to sit down with my friend Nancy McDonald Ladd and see what the latest is from all of you. Now with Reverend Amanda on board, you're even more blessed. Thank you for all of your good work on behalf of our faith through the decades. As you may remember, I left here long ago to become fellowshipped and ordained and to serve the Sugarloaf congregation in Germantown before joining UUA staff. Since 2015, I've been River Road's primary contact to the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association, which primary contact is our way of saying that when you want to know something or get some assistance or check in with the association, I'm the person to contact. So I've been working with your leadership many times through the years. I often also call on River Road to host events for our area, and I feel like we've been good partners in providing resources and opportunities for UUs around the Beltway. My visits to congregations are always a good time to remind you that you are part of the Central East region of the Unitarian Universalist Association. There are 5 UU regions in the United States, and ours covers about the whole Northeast, with the exception of New England, which has its own region because of all the congregations there. All told, we have 206 congregations and communities in the Central East region, and you're served by 11 program and administrative staff who work under my supervision. Those staff, like me, they answer questions that individual congregations have about church functioning and the like, and we connect you to resources from the UUA and from other congregations. We walk with you through installations and ordinations and openings and closings and tough and happy times. We remind you of your UU values when you need reminding, and we learn from you about how Unitarian Universalism is a living and growing faith when we need that reminding. Nearly all of this is funded through the generous contributions of places like RRUUC, who has been a steady honor congregation since 2012, and for many of the years before that as well. So what that means is that every time one of my team goes to help a congregation, or dream up a resource, or put together an event, River Road makes that possible. Thank you. The UUA is an association of congregations, the embodiment of the covenant that congregations have made to support each other. Your contributions are helping congregations and leaders that you will never meet, but your assistance is palpable, and we couldn't do it without you. On behalf of all of us at the UUA, thank you so much for your continued support. I have a squishier part to my job alongside the literally harder work of direct congregational service. The squishier part of my job, of all UUA staff's job, is to keep an eye on Unitarian Universalist trends, the ways in which our religion is shifting and moving in a world that needs us now more than ever. I love this squishy part of my job, especially when I get to preach in places like this. I love it because I get to plant some seeds in very fertile ground, or else say, hey, you have this plant growing here. Did you know they're growing a similar plant down the road? And they go with those plants over there, and the next thing you know, there's all sorts of gardens growing and bridges built and connections made, and all I had to do was notice when people are being smart and doing cool things and talk about it a lot. Noticing smart people and talking a lot are 2 of my favorite things to do. So I'm excited to introduce some ideas today which may or may not be new to you here, and see what you smart people, this smart organization, is able to do with them. See, the next generation of Unitarian Universalism is ready to be born, and it will be born out of places like River Road. I'm just an invested witness, though. You're the laborer, and our next generation is coming out from places just like this. In fact, from here, if your past is any indication. So what is the previous generation, and what is the next generation of Unitarian Universalism, then? I've done a lot of public speaking about the structural differences between what we commonly call 20th century church as opposed to what's needed in 21st century church. The answer comes down to one idea: focused mission. Today's church needs to understand why it exists in the world. A strong sense of why you exist and the purpose you serve to your own people and to your greater community is likely why this place is vibrant and active. But today I'd like to talk beyond the structural needs of the modern church and speak a bit about some theological changes that are needed, especially for we Unitarian Universalists. So sometimes I talk to UUs who know a lot about UU history, and sometimes they don't know anything at all, and hard to say what today will be like. Perhaps you'll nod a bit in recognition when you hear me say that throughout history, Unitarianism and Universalism have both been what religious folks call this worldly religions. That means that, theologically speaking, Unitarianism and Universalism have to do with this world, not usually with any next world. Does that sound familiar? So this worldly religions operate in contrast to other worldly religions that might have you focus on your afterlife more than on this life that you're living right now. In fact, throughout history, it has been Unitarians and Universalists who have reoriented religious folks towards the importance of the lives that they're currently living, rather than to heaven or hell or something in between or whatever fate awaits us. So I'm going to share some examples of this. For example, long ago, you may know, Unitarian and Universalists stemmed from the Puritans, like Thanksgiving ones, Puritans. Back when we were all Puritans, and the teaching was that God had already decided before you were born whether you would get to heaven or be damned into an eternal fiery hell, it was those who were to become Unitarians and Universalists who wondered, eventually louder and louder, whether or not that made sense. Surely one's behavior in life counts in God's eyes, our theological foreparents said. There has to be room for self-improvement, and for that self-improvement to count in the final reckoning, they said. It just can't all be predetermined, or else the fact of our living doesn't make any sense at all. The lives we live matter, the ancestors concluded. This worldly is what they were. What we do in this world counts, they taught. And so the people who eventually became Unitarians and Universalists left the Calvinist line of thinking that Puritans held and moved closer to where we are today, and in so doing, helped all American Protestantism reorient a little bit towards this world we live in and not a different one we might see after we die. That wasn't the last time we had an influence on American theology. 100 or so years later, after our split from Calvinist doctrine, as the industrial era came into being, it was common for American churches to teach that if people were poor or uneducated or had drunken spouses or had to work horrible jobs to stay alive, then that was due to their poor breeding or unfortunate, mysterious punishment by God, and there was really nothing that could be done. The social structure was what it was, folks thought, rich people up top and poor people at the bottom. No point, Orthodox American Protestantism taught. No point in educating children who ran about unsupervised in the streets. No point in passing laws that prevented those same children, say, from entering a factory for the rest of their lives as soon as they could hold still. That was just the way the world was. It was Universalists and Unitarians who taught that people could be assisted, changed, and redeemed by human efforts in this world, and that our social structures could be altered for the good. It was they who taught that creating fair and just social structures was a human responsibility. No one was inherently lost. No one was permanently damned. All we had to do is care and work, and people's lives were often turned around in this world. We could make a difference in this world. Now, I do have to mention that those folks who worked on those social causes definitely had an ideal life in mind, and that ideal was largely one that fit with white upper-class norms. We would hope to be much more expansive and inclusive in our care today. Still, this worldly orientation, the one that said that how people live in this world matters to all of us, that was striking and powerful for its time. It matters to us how people live in this world, even if they aren't us. UUs were beacons of this worldly idea. And 50 or so years after that, lots of Unitarians and even some Universalists joined with the religious humanist cause. Humanism's foundational idea is that it is this world's human experience that matters, period. We don't need to ponder infinity because it isn't relevant. This is the pinnacle of this worldly orientation, in my view, when you determine that it is only this world that, in fact, need be on the table for discussion at all. So those are three powerful historical examples of our this worldliness in the overall American religious landscape across time. I offer them because I want you to see that we UUs are practically this worldly despite ourselves. It's a reflex. I bet, even if you never heard about any of this history before, the stories I told today make sense in a certain way. They jibe with what you've experienced in your Unitarian Universalist life. Again and again, across time and culture, we pick this world in which to engage, with which to engage, in which to celebrate, in which to act. Which will make what I'm going to say even more striking and what I'm going to ask you to think about doing even more against the grain. But it's a new century, and you are ready for this next chapter of religious life, even though it's different. I think it's time to make a move away from this world's habits and practices. Deliberately and loudly move away. I think it's time to be very clear that when you walk through these doors, through the doors of any UU congregation, you are in many ways leaving the world and its ways behind. I want to talk about our congregations learning to deploy a counter-narrative to the world in which we currently live. I talked before about the importance of mission, the importance of a church knowing and stating your purpose. Well, nowadays, in big and small ways, church is most visibly relevant when it makes a space to be different from everyday life, to be redeemed from all that's wrong with the world. Our modern day habits and practices, folks, you may have noticed that they aren't serving us human beings very well. They aren't serving those in our pews, and they certainly aren't serving those in our streets. We UUs are not only called to make this world better, we are often called to do so by subverting the dominant paradigm, by creating and living a counter-narrative to the world as it currently presents itself. What's sort of mind-blowing about this venture is that we UUs have culturally often created and significantly invested in the dominant paradigm. So it's even more of a challenge to choose to move away from it. Nevertheless, this is our work. So far, I've thought of a bunch of examples of counter-narrative that a church could adopt, but I'm just going to highlight a few so that we aren't here all the rest of the day. One, an easy one. The world now wants us to communicate and commune with one another remotely, with multiple screens and persona and avatars in between one person and another. So one way to be countercultural is simply by arriving together physically at one time and sitting together in the same room, hearing each other's voices and stories, seeing each other's actual faces in their joys and sorrows. And the good news is that we're doing this important work right now. I myself spend most of my days in front of one screen or another. That might be true for you too. What a balm to the spirit to be in a room with other people who are trying to be good to each other. This Sunday situation here is no longer any sort of default. It is, however, an opportunity. And the fact that you have so many people willing to do it shows that there's a need. You are already providing a counter-narrative just by being you, so good job. But don't squander this opportunity to heal spirits and connect people. It happens less and less often in this world. Second counter-narrative. This one has to do with power. If you're a person with social privilege, which can be almost anyone in one way or another, but for some of us, we have quite a lot of social privilege due to our race or our gender or our education or our income level. And I hope you've learned from church and elsewhere how having privilege means that power just gets handed to you without your asking or deserving, and power doesn't get handed to those without those privileges. So that's what the world out there is like. The world is easier to navigate if you have qualities that the majority of folks in this room have, and gets progressively harder the more and more the culture thinks you vary from an ideal that it has chosen to set. What if church chose differently? What if church was a place that deliberately flipped the switch on our familiar American power dynamics? What if our words from the pulpit celebrated the ways in which people were able to subvert those power structures which cause such suffering outside of our doors? What if we spent time determining how our church processes could flip those forces and then experimented with making the changes that we imagined? What would that even look like? Who would get to speak most? The people most comfortable here or the people least comfortable? Whose ideas would take precedence? People with lots of formal education or people with not a lot of formal education? Who would belong? And who would be the visitor that everyone has to get used to? Whose accomplishments would be celebrated and for what? If we practiced this shift, even imperfectly, we could then at least make the claim that there's a better option than the one so many of our members and our neighbors experience every day out there. We could be a model. This counter-narrative, even imperfectly enacted, even just hinted at, could be a world changer. It could free all of us, the privileged and the less privileged alike, by letting us get away from a game that no one really ever wins. The game where we arbitrarily decide that some people get the power and others don't. Counter-narrative. The third counter-narrative, and this will be it for today, the world outside wants people to feel overwhelmed and impotent and scared, so they won't change anything. It wants those without privilege to shrink away and be silent and undemanding, and it wants people with privilege to turn away from the vast needs of the world and circle their wagons. What if church was where we refused to do that? What if we knew that we'd be helping those who need it and figuring out next steps, and always with our eyes on a better tomorrow? When we gather together for the purpose of creating courage and agency, we're offering a counter-narrative to the world outside. Even when our only recourse is to be together and sing, that's a far cry from scanning panic-inspiring headlines on our phones and an anonymous crowd on the metro, isn't it? Solidarity and courage make us brave everywhere we go, right when it's needed most, out there in the world that feeds on our fear but doesn't know what to do with our perseverance or our steadfastness or our insistence on the good. So those are some examples I've thought of, but it's not an exhaustive list, and frankly, I'm not all that creative. What matters is, what ways can you think of to provide a counter-narrative to the world as it is? What is this place, here and out there? What does it need that it doesn't have, and you are well-placed to provide? Think about serving elders. Think about demanding joy. Think about being and not buying. Think about the power of we, even when the we is a motley bunch. Notice the many things in the world that cause fear, hate, and disconnection, and bring their antidotes inside of these walls. We are all very proud of the certain successes of your past 6 decades, RRUUC, but it will not serve you to rest on those laurels. It will not serve you because the things that today's people hunger for are vast, and they are in here, and they are right outside your door. Our collective aching for justice and for connection, it's so loud that you can practically hear it when things get quiet enough. Don't close your ears or your doors to it. It will be messy, and you'll have to get used to new things, but you will be a force for good in this century here to the same degree you were in the last, just not in the same way. Dwell in the uncertainty. Live in the paradoxes. Live in the complexities and contradictions. This will be what makes you shine through the next 60 years. A new generation of church is being born, RRUUC, and maybe it's being born today. The world is hungry for the love and perspective and learning that you can bring to it and its people. When this secular world outside of our walls asks us what church is for and why to bother, we'll know what to say. We're answering the call of love by creating a counter-narrative so that people can be healed and made whole by each other, and the world can be restored and we can all rejoice in it, which is our birthright, which is our destiny, if we make it so. Let's do this. Let's do it together. Amen.